like family resource centres, addiction centres, youth services and suicide prevention organisations, amongst others. They are working over capacity and have had to adapt their services to meet the demand. They have done this with little support from the government. This is not sustainable, Minister. They need support and they deserve support. We also met with national mental health organisations who stated that the inability of people to be able to access mental health supports when they need it was at critical levels. In February, the Taoiseach announced a $10 million funding that will be made available to meet increased demand for mental health supports. Minister, the reality is that frontline mental health services that we met will see very little of this money, and based on previous announcements, I have no confidence that the money will reach the groups that really need it. We've been here before from this government. Big announcements about mental health, big announcements with very little substance. We were in a crisis in mental health provision pre-COVID, but the impacts of COVID has put us in a mental health emergency. Mental health services are experiencing unprecedented demands for mental health care. Many people using mental health services are doing so for the very, very first time, and too many of them are being left out in the cold as services are just not there to meet the demand. This is a really frightening place to be. This increase is set against excessive pre-pandemic waiting lists for care, and the result is the perfect storm that we are experiencing now. Our already under-resourced mental health services that were struggling to cope pre-COVID are now operating over capacity. This is also not sustainable. And speaking at the recent Oireachtas COVID committee, the Mental Health Commission CEO told members that our mental health system is not fit for purpose and it is out of date. Sinn Féin want to change this. It's unacceptable that in a year of national crisis that this government chose not to increase investment in mental health proportionally to the overall health budget. We need to tackle the issue of mental health in a real and sustainable way with a roadmap for capacity building in the system. But right now, what we need more than anything else is an emergency response to the crisis that we are currently in. This is what this motion sets out to do, through a series of common sense and practical proposals which, if implemented now, will make a real difference in the lives of people who are struggling. Sinn Féin is proposing a significant emergency investment in mental health care for a 6 to 12-month period through the provision of surge capacity provided by private practitioners providing urgent and immediate care. This emergency provision will address waiting lists and meet immediate demand through private care while giving the public system the breathing space it needs to increase capacity for the long term. And alongside this emergency provision, Sinn Féin will be putting in place measures that will have a positive long-term impact for mental health services. And some of the measures in the motions are to provide emergency talk therapy fund so you can access an accredited counsellor or therapist on referral from a GP. The Irish College of General Practitioners have even told us that a lot of their members would be able to provide the service in their own practice. A one-stop shop, if you like, Minister. This is not aspirational, it's doable and it's achievable, it's realistic, and with the right political will, it can be implemented very quickly. We are also calling to expand capacity in CAMHS and the primary care mental health services to meet the demand of the already 10,000 children, but mostly 10,000 children and adults waiting on the public psychology appointments, and the 2,500 children who are waiting for appointments in CAMHS. This will be done by the recruitment of additional psychologists into the public sector. The Psychology Society of Ireland, who have over 3,500 members, have publicly endorsed this plan, and they have said they have the capacity in their own ranks to provide the services. No more long waiting lists and the ability to access services when you need them. Sinn Féin would also remove the GP and medical card accessibility barriers to deliver universal access to counselling. We have been calling this for a long time, and we have it fully costed in our alternative budget. And one of the major gaps in the services, Minister, and I said this to you before, is those that have a distress, a mental health emergency outside the hours of 9 to 5. At present, there is no statewide provision of 24/7 crisis service at community level. People must have access to mental health treatment as and when they need it. We aim to establish a 24/7 mental health crisis de-escalation team. Our proposal reflects a similar pilot underway in the North. And as we know, mental health issues do not just occur between 9 to 5 or take a break at the weekend. This ambulance would include a mental health nurse who will call to the person who is having a mental health situation in our community. It will triage them, it will treat them, it will refer them, and will bring them to the appropriate service. This will be a start in delivering 24/7 care. From the outset of the latest lockdown, I have called on the Minister for Health to extend the surgical capacity in private hospitals to include mental health acute care. The latest response I have, Minister, was last Friday, and it stated that the HSE are currently in a tendering process with private mental health operators. We're almost over a year into this pandemic now, and we're still in negotiations. Minister, this is not good enough, and it needs to change now. Mental health can no longer be the Cinderella of the health services. One group of people who urgently need emergency treatment is those suffering from eating disorders. There's only 3 beds in the public sector for adults who are looking to access treatment for eating disorders. This is not good enough, and this can't be provided in the surge capacity. Parents have told me of these adult children, of their adult children, are saying that they're watching their children die in front of their eyes, Minister. I've spent all week on the phone talking to parents left, right and centre. Community care, in their words, is non-existent. And we've heard from the government's rhetoric, Minister, that we're all in this together. Today is your chance to prove this. And I'm asking that you, Minister, and all parties, all TDs from all parties and none, get behind this motion and to give the support so people can get the care they need, when they need it and where they need it.
There isn't a family in this state that hasn't been affected by mental health, and sadly far too many families have also been impacted by the lack of mental health services available in this state. And that lack of services has failed far too many of our people, and sadly we have lost far too many people as a result. And make no mistake about it, mental health difficulties can turn to personal tragedy, and it is incumbent on us to help our people and save lives. This crisis has been exacerbated by COVID-19, and we need an emergency response. And I think today's bill, brought forward by my colleague Deputy Ward, is such a response, a complete response, a compassionate response, and offers practical solutions. This is a real emergency, and we need to act. And sadly, my own home city of Galway has also suffered greatly from those lack of services. And I've conducted an anonymous survey to hear people's experiences of this. And one that really struck out to me was from one person, and they said, "I see a different nurse or doctor every single time I have an appointment. They don't have accurate knowledge of one's individual case and therefore don't have much to offer in the way of useful support. I am repeatedly told to take walks and meditate, when in actuality I need a therapist. I need eating disorder services that don't exist. I need trauma support, and the list goes on." And I've spoken with people who have needed mental health services, and I've spoken to different organisations, and one thing comes back loud and clear: we need 24-hour mental health care, and the lack of care outside 9 to 5 reflects an attitude of a bygone age, and we need better than that. Mental health challenges are 24/7, so our response needs to be 24/7.
Minister, in the past year we have seen a global health emergency, the likes of which none of us could have imagined. However, in the midst of this pandemic, there has been another health crisis spreading through every town and every village across this country, and one that there is no vaccine for. That is the crisis of mental health. Years of underfunding in the health service in general, and the lack of focus on mental health issues in particular, have created a backlog that has been exacerbated by this pandemic. Lockdowns have had a dramatic effect on people's psychology, while also limiting the provision of services available to them. 2,500 children, Minister, are waiting on CAMHS appointments, and they are the children that are merely on the waiting list, not the ones waiting to be assessed. 9,000 children almost waiting on primary care psychology. Again, only the names on the list. Over 1,500 adults waiting on primary care psychology treatment with the HSE. In the past weeks, I've been engaging with service users, service providers and even youth clubs across Longford and Westmeath to get their opinion on where mental health services are at the moment. And I believe that the Sinn Féin motion here today will offer concrete solutions to that crisis, to deal with it effectively and to meet the demand growing in mental health services. The recent survey of almost 5 out of 10 younger people under 34 reporting being downhearted or disheartened or down most of the time is absolutely terrifying. We don't just want people to merely survive in this country. We want them to live and to thrive, and there is a marked difference. This motion, we propose removing barriers around medical cards and income tests so that everyone can access these services. We propose additional resources and new services to both prevent and react to crisis situations. Additional child and adult psychologists and acute mental health beds, funding for training for counselling psychologists and talk therapy, and preventative measures of working with community groups and de-escalation training. Mental health is not 9 to 5, and it needs to be met with a service that is not 9 to 5. These measures are essential if we are to deal with the surge in demand. Make no mistake, we are currently nowhere near capacity. We are nowhere where we need to be. And if we don't take urgent measures, more people will continue to suffer, and ultimately, more people will not make it through. We need to act now, and we need to act in a manner that ensures that nobody is left behind.
Martin Kenny now.
Minister, I was glad to hear in your speech that you say you're not opposing this particular motion today. However, there was some things that in your speech were quite alarming if you actually sit down and think about it. That you said that within 12 weeks somebody will have an appointment. 12 weeks of a family watching a family member in distress and worry and anxiety, waiting to get an appointment, and that is what we have established in this country as the norm, is a poor reflection on the health service that we've had pre-COVID. Now we have a COVID situation which has, exacerbated all of those problems, and I think you would acknowledge that, and government needs to acknowledge that, and the only way we can deal with this is to heavily invest in making sure that we provide for the huge surge that's going to come, that's practically already there for many cases. We have people who, because of the lockdown and the restrictions, feel very stressed and anxious in respect of all of that, and there's going to be an impact of that. But there's also going to be an impact of people who have contracted COVID, and we come across them all the time. People who can't sleep at night, people who have lost energy, people who have huge stress in their lives and who will undoubtedly come with anxiousness in respect of all of that as well. So, this is a situation that is going to get worse in the coming days and weeks. So, Minister, I think we all need to recognise that the system that's there, and in fairness, I spoke to you many times about the situation, particularly in Sligo Leitrim with CAMS and with other issues there. We need to get the investment. We need to get the additional people in place. The CAMS service in Sligo Leitrim is at half the capacity because it's so understaffed. That has a huge impact on families across the entire area. And that's not just in Sligo Leitrim, it's practically everywhere through the country. So we really need to put the effort in to deliver for this. In the past number of days, I spoke to people from various agencies and organisations across the constituency. I spoke to STOP, which is a community organisation that came from the community to provide services for suicide prevention. They get no funding from government, and yet they are there to stop the gap that government leaves because of the underfunding in the centre, in the mental health services. We also see the same situation in regard to the Irish Advocacy Network, Centre for Independent Living in Sligo, all of these organisations doing their best to try and assist people who are under stress. And at the same time, government is not investing in the mental health services, and it needs to happen now. So I would implore you, Minister, not just to accept the motion, but to invest in the provisions that this motion puts forward.
Thomas Gold, to conclude.
Minister, recently myself and TD Donegal held an online survey in Cork in relation to people's mental health. We've got some really, worrying figures. 86% felt that they felt downhearted or depressed recently. 90% felt there wasn't enough mental health services in Cork. And 47% said that they'd been waiting over 6 months for services. Now, on Monday night, we held a town hall meeting with these people and others to discuss their mental health. And the stories were harrowing. I just want to thank the people for their honesty to share their personal experience. But one person described how his GP had to beg to get him into mental health services, and that when he got in there, before he was discharged, the psychiatrist gave him a leaflet and said that an emergency team would be in contact. 3 weeks later, they rang that person. 3 weeks. It's only the grace of God that he was there to answer the call to them. And a few other points. One lady who works in childcare and works in early education described how she believes that vulnerable children are falling through the cracks because of lack of resources and a lack of coordination. I have a list of stories from people here. The one thing I would say is people want to talk, people want help now. For years, mental health in Ireland was brushed under the carpet and people were ashamed. I think now we have to realise it is a crisis in Ireland that COVID-19 has made worse, and we need support. And I'm asking you, Minister, to support my colleague Mark Ward and this motion, because this will make a difference to people's lives. And my final point to you is, Cork and Kerry region has the highest waiting list in CAMS. 69 children are on the list over a year.
Thank you.
So we know that mental health was in crisis pre-COVID, and we also know that the crisis has obviously escalated throughout COVID. But what does that mean? That means that our people are suffering, that they have been experiencing great trauma and loss, huge change and anxiety, financial strain and pressure, and even home insecurity, just to name a few. The government's response to mental health has fallen short for many, many years, and I note that the Mental Health Commission told the Oireachtas Special Committee on COVID-19 response that Ireland's mental health system is not fit for purpose, it's out of date, and investment in it and the community is needed. So I'm asking you on behalf of my constituents in County Clare, will the government take stock now? Will the government now respond to the needs of its people? They certainly hope so. There is still no statewide provision of 24/7 crisis mental health care at the community level. This is a significant failure, and this is what I want to focus on today. I want to stand up for the many in County Clare who have made great attempts at reaching out for help, especially the constituents who live in rural and isolated areas. And unfortunately, until we have that 24/7 crisis mental health care in the community, we run the risk of our people experiencing further trauma and negativity, with some who have reached out to me describing it as a complete rejection. The truth is that their experiences to ask for help when in distress is actually an incredibly difficult step to take. This needs to be reflected on by those in power, as I can tell you that unless you have the personal experience, there is no appreciation for that overwhelming feeling when you knock on a door and it goes unanswered. That feeling that you just do not exist. This week I held a discussion over Zoom with community representatives and service representatives within County Clare, and they talked about the high levels of demand on the ground and the rise in reaching out for support for the first time. I want to commend them on the great work that they have been doing. The reality is that people are losing loved ones, jobs, relationships, cars, homes, and they are gripped with fear. We ourselves in Sinn Féin have called for the establishment of a 24/7 care public crisis de-escalation multi-agency triage team ambulance service. People do not control when and how mental health crisis will impact them individually, so we are calling on all TDs to support this motion and send that clear message to our people who need it most, that they are heard, their needs are important, and that politics will no longer fail them.
Deputy Morris Quinlivan.
Minister, I've spoken on this issue of mental health since I was elected in 2016 countless number of times. Unfortunately, my own city of Limerick has the highest number of people who take their lives through suicide. It's always almost the highest figure in the state, and unfortunately that hasn't changed over the last number of years. In Limerick, the suicide can be very public. You know, the trauma of the helicopter over the city whilst the search for a loved one, not just traumatic for the family, but traumatic for the whole community. It's very, very upsetting. Local services, as I said, you know, they are stretched, they're under pressure, and COVID has really exacerbated the situation. And if anything comes out of today's debate what I would suggest and what we definitely need, and you can do it in Limerick, or ready to do it if you want to, is a de-escalation team. It needs to be put in place in Limerick that will deal with the emergency, because we are failing people. And I want to commend some of the local services that are out. Limerick Suicide Watch, Treaty Suicide Watch, they're out night-time patrolling the bridges and the areas in our city. And I've been out with them myself, and I've told them, like, they are the last defence where the services have failed, and unfortunately people take their own lives. So Minister, look, I don't want to be here again next year or the year after talking about the same issue. Get into Limerick as soon as you can and open our service there.
Mark Ward. And I'd like to thank all TDs who contributed to this debate today on this motion. And I know, Minister, that you will not be opposing this motion, and that's all fine and well, but its action is what is needed. When I stated in my maiden speech to you, not my maiden speech, but your maiden speech as Minister, that I'd work with you in opposition in a real, tangible, solution-focused way, this is what I was talking about. Motions like this is what I was talking about. It's time for you, Minister, now to stand up and be counted and to put the actions in place that are laid out in this motion. So I'm putting you on notice that I'll be holding you to account to this motion for the duration of your term as Minister, and all of the other stuff. And I do welcome some of the other initiatives that you mentioned in your statement that could be coming on board. But we need to see fast improvements in the 10,000 people that are waiting on the public psychology list. We need to see additional capacity put in CAMHS. It's incumbent on you now, Minister, to put in place a 24/7 emergency mental health care so people can get the care they need, where they need it and when they need it. And as Morris, the Deputy Quinlivan said, we need to get a crisis de-escalation team in place in this state, so that will really meet the need what's out there. And as I said, Minister, many people are experiencing mental health issues for the very first time. It's a really frightening place to be. And on the back of this motion that you're not opposing, but I want you to support this part of it, is that you've agreed to put in place immediate access to talk therapy from GP referral without having the medical card barrier. And just to go back on what Deputy Cairns was saying earlier on in relation to community resources, they can be resourced to provide this service, and they can get extra resources from that as well. So it's a win-win situation. Community services are getting the resources they need, and people who need mental health services are getting the service that they need. I'll be calling you out on every chance I get, Minister, if this is not implemented, and I hope I don't have to. I really hope I don't have to be coming here and calling you out on it. So the onus is also on you to place additional capacity in our private mental health hospitals, and I'm asking you to prioritise people with eating disorders. I know you've mentioned 3.9 million coming down the road, but we need help here and now. People are dying right in front of us. So this motion outlines a roadmap for mental health supports in the here and now, and I'll be watching this intently for progress. And when Mary Lou MacDonald said that Sinn Féin would be the most effective opposition in the history of this